Hi everybody, I'm Mel.
And I'm Rachel, and welcome to our conversation. Mel, here we are in June, and the last time we talked was 2020 Vision at the end of February.
I know.
And so much has happened and so much has changed since, hasn't it?
Oh, we're in a completely different place now to where we were a few months ago, that's for sure.
So let's just take ourselves back to the 29th of February for a few moments and indulge in a bit of reminiscing. It was such a good district event, wasn't it?
Absolutely brilliant. What was your highlight from it?
I think it was for me that the night before I kind of didn't sleep well, kind of thinking nobody's going to turn up. All these people have booked in, but nobody's turned up. And on the day, stood in the entrance foyer at Linicum and seeing so many people coming in and the buzz in their conversation and their expectation of what they were coming to and excitement was just palpable in the air. And that just carried me through the whole day, and it's going to live on in my memory for a long time, that atmosphere and excitement. What about you?
Yeah, it was wonderful. I think for me it was hearing the four speakers. So we had, if you weren't at 2020 Vision, we had talks on vision, on discernment, on leadership, and on mission and growth. And so the four speakers hadn't met before the event, had they? But we had met them and we had briefed them, but we hadn't told them what to say. And all of their messages just seemed to link so beautifully to one another. And you could really see this narrative that God had managed to weave throughout the day. And they fit together beautifully. And I think that I found overwhelming, that there was a really clear message that came out about vision and mission. And clearly just came from God, and people were so inspired by the day, and I was really inspired by the day. So
yeah. And then if you remember, at the end of the day, we had this idea that we sort of said, well, come to every circuit before the summer and share what's happened and some of the themes, and then we went into lockdown and we've not been able to do anything.
We've not, but that doesn't mean that we've been resting on our laurels. We have got a plan. So we're doing a 3-part film series, aren't we?
Yeah.
So in our first one today, we are talking all about mission. What is mission? What's your one thing, and how do you find it? In our second video, we're talking about the current climate. So being in lockdown, how do we do mission well while we are in lockdown? And what's our third video about, Rachel?
Look into the future, and what's mission going to look like in the future, and how do we plan for mission in the future when we don't know what the future is going to be like.
So 3 great videos, so do keep tuned into all of them. We suggest doing it as a group from your church or from your circuit if you can, just so you can have some good discussion at the end of the videos as well. But Rachel, you've been struck recently, haven't you, with some parallels between what's happening at the moment and the story of the Exodus. So some of the learning that we can do by reading that story.
Yeah, it's one of those stories that I'm often drawn back to, and I have found myself reflecting on it during this lockdown period. And although the context is so very different, we're not fleeing slavery in a place like Egypt. We've not been oppressed. But I think there's a lot we can learn about what it means to be the people of God in changing times. If you remember the story in the book of Exodus, the context has changed. The situation for the Israelites has changed. They were in a settled land. They were being prosperous and fruitful, and they were respected because of Joseph and his legacy. And then suddenly things change. A Pharaoh comes who didn't know Joseph, and they're in forced labor. They're oppressed. They're not respected. And they are crying out for justice and to be released from that oppression. And although, as I say, it's a very different context, but when things change, when the landscape suddenly we find ourselves in changes, as it then does for the people of Israel as they leave Egypt and have to find a new way of how do we live? when everything that we've got used to has been taken away from us. And that's going to change again as they journey for the next 40 years through the desert and then arrive at the promised land. Things will change again and have to adapt to a more settled way of life again. So I think there's a lot we can learn, even though our context is very different.
Yeah, definitely. And the very beginning of Exodus, when Moses goes into the wilderness and has an encounter with God through the burning bush, we can learn a lot about mission through that encounter as well, can't we?
Yeah, that's right. So let's just have a think about when we use the word mission. What are we talking about? What do we mean? Is it a word we use a lot if we think about it in everyday speech and context?
Yeah, I mean, outside of a church context, not massively, I would say. I'm trying to think to when I've said mission and I've not been in church or talking about church. To be honest, what comes to mind for me is when I go shopping. If I've got a big shopping list or I know for certain what I want, then I'll go into the shop and I'll say to whoever I'm with, right, I'm on a mission. I need this, 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 and this. Let's go. And I'll power around the shop and I'll, all the things that I need. And that's probably where I use the word mission outside of the church context.
Yeah. And I always think about the Mission Impossible film series. I loved those, particularly the early ones, and the tension and the excitement and the drama and how they were just so focused in getting the job done, and it was like that, your mission should you choose to accept it. So it's that drama that's part of it. But I think what is common between the two is that sense of focus, isn't it? That very clear that what you're doing and what you're about.
Which is funny because when churches write mission plans or we talk about mission within the church, I think sometimes it can lack that focus, clear direction and purpose. And instead it might encompass many, 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 many things when really it just needs to be this one thing.
Yeah, and again, Exodus and Moses, from that point of meeting with God at the burning bush, his mission becomes very clear and focused, doesn't it? That God calls him and God sends him back to Egypt to fulfill his mission. And actually, that reminds us of what mission actually means. The word mission simply means to be sent. The word itself is from the Latin. It's a Latin word that means to send. And the Greek equivalent in the New Testament particularly is the word we get apostle from. An apostle is someone who's sent by God to do something. And again, just understanding what the word means in that sense gives it that clear focus, doesn't it? And so here's Moses being sent by God to do mission on his mission. And it's very clear and very focused, isn't it? He says that God says to Moses in chapter 3, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And this is going to involve then worshipping God on this mountain and bringing the people to a land flowing with milk and honey. But it is very clear what Moses is going to do. And very focused. It's not going to kind of be airy-fairy and everything and nothing, but a very focused, clear mission in that being.
Yeah, I think we can learn a lot from that, for our own context in churches as well. And this actually reminds me of a 2020 vision. Trey talked about vision, didn't he?
Yeah.
He told a story about a church who had a very, very clear mission, which was, if I'm remembering it correctly, it was our mission is to teach people how to pray.
Yeah.
It was their one thing. And then everything flowed from that or connected to that in some way.
Yeah. And I think that resonated with quite a few people, if I remember, had commented on that, both in the workshops that I was part of, in the small groups I was around at the time, and in some of the feedback, that really liked that idea of it being so, in a sense, simple, though it's not simple, but the sense of our mission is focused, and we don't have to do everything. but everything has to relate to that one statement, if you like.
Yeah. And of course, the tricky part is, how do you discern that one thing? And so that's one thing that we wanted to try and do in this conversation, isn't it? Is help people to discern their one thing. What is the mission of their church?
Yeah. And I think that's an issue for Moses as well. If you read that sort of chapters 3 and 4 of Exodus, in that conversation with God at the burning bush, that conversation with God is part of the discerning who God is. How will he tell the Israelites when I go back? How will they know that I've met with you? And who shall I tell them? And how do I help them to come on this journey with me? That all that discernment is wrapped up in that, and it is about listening. How we listen to what God is saying through reading the scriptures, through our prayer life, alongside reading and listening to the signs of the times and looking at what's going on in our communities and listening to other people, and then putting it all together and say, so God, what are you saying to us in all of this?
Yeah.
And I think listening is the key to us discerning what God is saying, our mission, or what he's sending us to do in that sense. And I think another example that I think one of the speakers used in 2020 Vision was one that I often use, and the story of Kennedy going to NASA when he was president of the United States of America, and he meets the janitor as he's going round on his tour and asks him, what's your job here at NASA? And the janitor says, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. And again, that very clear focus that everybody, regardless of what their role is in the organisation, they know that their contribution is vital to helping put a man on a moon. And maybe that's the part we need to think about as churches in terms of our mission, in terms of how does the gift I have to offer to the life of the church and the community help fulfill that overriding purpose, whether it's teaching people to pray or helping people to meet Jesus. I'm a door steward, I'm making the coffee, I'm cleaning the toilets to help people meet Jesus.
Yeah.
And maybe if we began to think in that more focused way, we would see the change and transformation that only God can bring. Can't be worse than how we're doing at the minute anyway, can it?
So we've designed some questions, haven't we? And Rachel, if you want to share your screen. So these questions are designed for you to work through on your own or in a group. As I said before, we advocate a group setting. Somehow you can do over Zoom. And these questions are really to try and focus on how you feel about mission. What is mission to you? What do you understand by it? And let's process that. Let's name some of that. And then we move forward to look at how we might discern the one thing that God might be calling you to do as a church. So we'll have a look at these questions.
So Mel, here's our questions, which hopefully everyone at home can read. So we suggest you start with an activity. Get a piece of paper and write in the middle of it the word mission. And then just brainstorm and write all the words that come to mind when you think of that word. There may be positive words, there might be negative words, there might be feelings that you associate with it. There is no right or wrong answer. Just fill the page with the words that come to mind. And you might think of other things or other contexts in which you use that word in your everyday speech. And then the next question is, what makes you excited about thinking of mission? We're thinking here in terms of the mission of God in our own context, in our own churches. What makes you fearful about mission?
And then we spend some time thinking about our one thing. So let's take it back to ourselves. So if the one thing were dependent on you alone, what would it be? So really what we're asking here is, what gifts has God given to you? And what is God saying to you about how to use these for mission? And then let's track that on now to look at our church community. So if the one thing were dependent on your existing church, your church community, what would it be? So again, what gifts and skills has God given to your church, and what is God saying to you about how to use these for mission? And then let's move it on one stage further. If the one thing were dependent on your local community, what would it be? So what are the needs and the opportunities of your community, and how do these join up with the gifts and the skills that you feel you've been given and that your church has been given? And see if when you put them together, are there any crossovers? Are there any patterns? Are there any clear ways of needs being met? And let's see if one thing emerges from that.
So I guess, Mel, what we're encouraging people to do with these last 3 questions is particularly to think about discernment and actually engaging in discernment, isn't it?
Mm.
And the final activity, question number 7, takes that discernment one stage further in terms of bringing God more firmly into that conversation. So our question is, how are you listening to God in all of this? Because discernment isn't discernment if God isn't a part of the conversation. So our suggestion to you is to do this. Why not find a quiet place and some time that you have, so don't rush through this, to sit and read the story of the Exodus for yourself. Begin in Exodus chapter 1 and keep going. And as you read, ask, what is God saying to my situation through this? And there may be other things that come to mind as you read it. What are those things? What are the other passages of scripture that seem to connect with this story or with what you're thinking about, or may just seem relevant, that God is prompting as you reflect on this passage? What are you then asking God for? Spend some time doing this quietly by yourself, and then arrange a time when, as a group, as a church community, can come together on Zoom or some other similar platform and share what you think God has been saying to you as a group. And hopefully God will surprise you that there may be a lot of commonality through that, and it hopefully will become clear to you what God is saying to you. And that's beginning to get into a way of discernment, which was one of the themes, if you remember, in our 2020 Vision event. Seeing, hearing, and then responding. But we're not focusing on the responding bit at this point, are we, Mel? We're going to leave that for the next video.
That's right. So just to sign off now, we really hope and pray that this resource, this first film, blesses you, that it is useful. It's been great to spend this time together. Rachel and I are available, so keep in touch with us if you want to talk any of this through further or want any more guidance or advice on this. And do tune in to our second video and our third video so that you can complete the journey with us.
We look forward to seeing you soon.
You do. Bye-bye.
Bye.